How's it going? My name is Connor Gray, and as you can probably tell, this isn't my real voice. I'm using AI to narrate my videos. I want to be open about why. Back in July of 2025, I went through severe seizures that affected my brain chemistry. Since then, my memory hasn't been the same, and social interaction has become very difficult for me outside of people I'm already close to. I've also been dealing with bipolar-like episodes and heavy depression, which makes it really hard for me to get on camera. Because of that, creating videos the normal way has felt almost impossible. Using AI lets me still share my thoughts and ideas even when I'm struggling. I'll be honest, I spend a lot of time alone, and over time this AI voice has started to feel a bit like a companion while I work. It may sound strange, but it's simply the reality I'm living with right now. The character you see in the background is a new persona I created to represent the channel. I truly hope you enjoy the video I'm about to present. God bless you all.
I'm going to lay out one theory from start to finish that connects everything. Doctor Strange's 14 million futures, Steve Rogers as the anchor being, Loki's relocation, the Fantastic Four universe, Moon Knight's placement, Doom's asset collection strategy, the bench scene as a deliberate branch trigger, and how Secret Wars leads to a soft reboot that continues the stories in a seamless way. This isn't me throwing random ideas at the wall. This is a precise chain of dominoes where every piece leads into the next. First, I need you to accept the main premise. Steve Rogers is the anchor being of Earth 616. Not in a he's the strongest way, in a structural way. Some universes are held together by a specific constant, a person whose existence and role stabilizes reality. And in the MCU, the universe always felt like it revolved around Steve's moral center. The Avengers don't just assemble around strength, they assemble around principle. Steve is the one character who consistently functions like a compass, and when Steve is removed from the equation, the MCU immediately becomes unstable. The team fractures, reality gets messier, and the multiverse era begins. That's not random. That's what it looks like when an anchor being is no longer firmly planted inside the universe. Now rewind to Infinity War, and the moment that most people interpret in the simplest way, Doctor Strange looking into 14,065 possible futures. Most fans think Strange was only calculating how to beat Thanos. But I don't think that's what that scene truly means. I think Strange saw Doctor Doom coming. I think he saw that even if you defeat Thanos in 1,000 different ways, something worse was still going to happen later because the threat wasn't only a battle, it was the multiverse itself. The multiverse guarantees that something bigger will eventually collide into your reality. So Strange wasn't just looking for a win against Thanos. He was looking for the one outcome where the universe ends up with the correct roster and correct conditions to survive what comes next. That's why one way is not just a Thanos solution. It's a two-stage win condition. Beat Thanos, forge the post-war world into a version that can survive Doomsday and Secret Wars. This is where Tony Stark becomes important. People always debate whether Tony had to die. But in this theory, Tony's death is not just tragedy, it's structural. If Tony lives, the world doesn't transform the same way. The power vacuum doesn't form. The next generation doesn't rise in the same shape. And most importantly, Spider-Man doesn't become the version of Spider-Man he needs to become. Tony's death forces Peter into true independence. It forces him to grow up in a way he never would if Tony kept catching him every time he fell. It reshapes the chain of events that creates the kind of Spider-Man who can survive multiversal-level threats. And the ripple effect matters. If Tony is alive, Mysterio is basically an Iron Man-era problem. Tony is the symbol. Tony is the target. Tony is the legacy. But with Tony dead, Peter becomes the lightning rod. That drags Peter into a crisis that pushes him toward the identity exposure, the desperation, and the spell that cracks open the multiverse in the first place. And that multiverse crack becomes a necessary stage of growth. It hardens Peter and forces him into the ultimate version of himself. That's why Strange's one way can't just be about stopping Thanos. Strange had to choose the single line where Thanos is stopped, and the aftershock set the MCU on the path to create doom-worthy opponents. So Strange is doing something most people don't realize. He's indirectly shaping the entire post-Endgame era by choosing the Endgame outcome that produces the right hero ecosystem. Strange is the strategist who sees the long war coming and understands that winning Thanos is only the first checkpoint. Now we jump to Endgame, and the second pillar of this whole theory, the branch timeline created by Steve's decision. At the end, Steve goes to return the stones. Everyone says he created a branch and lived happily ever after. But I think the bigger truth is this. Yes, a branch is created, but the branch Steve created is the timeline we've been watching this whole time. The MCU's Infinity Saga isn't the untouched original continuity. It's already a timeline that exists because Steve went back and stayed, meaning the universe we followed from Phase 1 onward has always had Steve's time loop consequences baked into it. The MCU is not simply a straight line. It's built on a hidden circular foundation. Now here's where the logic gets heavy, and this is why the theory becomes so precise. If Steve stays in the past with Peggy, then reality contains two versions of Steve in the same universal history. The Steve living his hidden life in the past, continuing forward through decades. The Steve still frozen in ice who must be found later and become the Avenger we follow. And I'm not saying they're variants. It's the same Steve, same person, same soul. Just 2 points on his timeline existing inside one reality's historical flow. This is the paradox pressure. Reality can tolerate time loops and branches, but it can't tolerate an indefinite overlap that threatens the consistency of the entire structure. A correction becomes necessary, and this is where Loki becomes the key that people aren't connecting. After Loki becomes the god of stories, holding the branching timelines at the end of time and preserving free choice instead of pruning like Kang, Loki becomes the perfect mechanism for how the multiverse handles corrections without erasing everything. Loki is not a conqueror, he's a balancer. He doesn't have to destroy a timeline to solve a paradox. He can reposition the pieces so the timeline survives while still allowing choice to exist. So the correction for the two Steve paradox doesn't have to be violent. It can be surgical. And here is the surgical solution. Loki relocates the hidden Steve and Peggy into another universe without them realizing it. Not a ship, not a portal, not Steve choosing to leave. It's a cosmic rewrite that happens like this. They go to sleep and wake up somewhere else. And that somewhere else is the Fantastic Four universe. This relocation would likely happen sometime around the mid-century, like the 50s or 60s, before Frozen Steve is thawed in the 2000s/2010s. Why that timing? Because the universe has to preserve the inevitability of the Infinity Saga chain. Frozen Steve still has to be discovered. He still has to become the Avenger we follow. The Avengers still have to form. Everything still has to happen. So Loki relocates the hidden Steve only once the timeline is safe to proceed, meaning the story we know can still occur without collapsing under paradox. Now here's a crucial part. When Loki relocates hidden Steve out of 616, that is the moment the long-term instability begins. Not when Steve is old, not when he passes the shield, not when he retires. The destabilization begins when Earth 616 quietly loses the version of Steve that was anchoring its deep structure. The universe doesn't explode right away. It fractures gradually. It takes time for the consequences to show. But over years, the cracks spread, and then the multiverse era shows up as the symptoms. Branches colliding, incursions, realities bleeding into each other. So in this model, the multiverse saga is not random chaos. It is the delayed shockwave of the anchor being displaced. Now we talk about the Fantastic Four universe itself, because in this theory, it isn't just where the Fantastic Four are. It's a major chessboard in the multiversal war. It is the universe that contains Steve Rogers, relocated by Loki, the Fantastic Four, obviously, and likely other projects that feel strangely detached from the main MCU continuity. And that's where Moon Knight comes in. I think Moon Knight is from the Fantastic Four universe too. Present day, modern era, and that is why the Moon Knight show feels different from everything else. It's more mythic, more spiritual, more isolated from Avengers politics, and it doesn't feel woven into the main MCU machine. That doesn't mean Marvel forgot to connect it. It can mean Marvel deliberately presented it as isolated because we weren't in 616. We were looking at another universe's corner of the board. And I'm not saying Moon Knight is one of Doom's top must-control pieces like Wanda or Sentry. I'm not framing him as a living Infinity Stone. I'm saying Moon Knight has value, but we don't have to lock in what kind of value. What matters is that he can function as a bridge character, the kind of character you can pull into Doomsday in an Ant-Man style way. Not because he's the biggest power in the room, but because he was already involved in the kind of artifact/secret world infrastructure that Doom and multiversal forces would inevitably touch. If Moon Knight is in that universe, it also implies something else. That universe has deep mythic infrastructure. Moon Knight is tied to Egyptian gods and cosmic spiritual systems. That suggests other pantheons exist there too. That means Wakanda and Bast could exist there as well, as a secret nation the world doesn't fully understand. And if Wakanda exists in that universe, the interesting dynamic becomes, who knows? Doom might know because he's Doom, intelligence, ambition, advanced knowledge. And Steve might know because he's a displaced outsider who already knew Wakanda's truth in his original universe. That creates a powerful secret layer where only a couple key players understand how important that hidden nation really is in the multiversal chess game. Now we bring Dr. Doom into focus, because Doom is the reason Strange's choices matter, the reason Loki's balancing matters, and the reason Steve's branch planning matters. Doom isn't just fighting heroes. Doom is collecting leverage. He is building a multiversal win condition the way Thanos built an Infinity Stone win condition. Instead of stones, Doom collects assets, people with reality leverage, people with multiversal access, people with god-tier power and pawns. He can deploy into different universes to harvest what he needs. And if Doom wants to move across universes without relying on tech alone, then the most valuable key is America Chavez, because she can travel the multiverse directly. If Doom can manipulate or control her power, he doesn't need a machine. He doesn't need a portal network. He has multiversal movement as a natural ability under his control. Pair that with someone like Wanda, who can bend reality and rewrite rules, and someone like Sentry, who is raw, unstable god-tier force. And you have Doom building a toolkit that's basically a living version of the Infinity Gauntlet strategy. America is the door. Wanda is the reality editor. Sentry is the battering ram. So in this theory, Doom's priority targets are America Chavez, Wanda, and Sentry, because they represent the exact three abilities Doom would need to dominate multiversal conflict without being limited by physics or technology. And yes, there are always rumors floating about what kinds of pawns Doom might use, like proxy forces in one universe, monstrous heavy hitters in another, stuff fans speculate about constantly, whether it's Sentinels harvesting powered kids in one corner of the multiverse, or Doom using some ultimate level pawn in another. The spirit of the idea is the same. Doom deploys pieces across realities to gather what he needs, like he's harvesting resources. Now we return to the bench scene, because this is the part that ties everything into one perfect loop. The old man on the bench is not simply Steve who returned stones and lived quietly. In this theory, that old Steve is a Steve who has lived through far more than the audience realizes. He has lived through the multiversal crisis. He knows what Doom does, he knows what wins and what fails, and he returns to one precise junction in time to trigger the dominoes that create the prepared timeline. That's why he doesn't return on the platform. The platform return would be the simple endgame explanation, but the bench scene is not Steve completing a mission. It's Steve arriving from a later path by a different method to start the next chain. And what is his chain? It's the deliberate branch setup that creates the post-endgame prepared timeline. Giving Sam the shield is not just emotion, it's strategy. Steve knows that Sam's path as Captain America creates a specific sequence of events, choices, and consequences that the universe needs. Steve knows that the leadership vacuum, the mistakes, the growth, and the reformation of teams are part of forging the heroes into their Doomsday-ready forms. Steve is not only trusting people, he's placing them.